Why do we have to tolerate a force like the Houthis shooting at our aircraft carriers? Why do we have to tolerate all the terrorism from the Iranians? They're like a pufferfish. I mean, they're making themselves look bigger and more fearsome than they actually are. They don't have a regular military. They don't have a regular air force. They have this nuclear program that's on the verge of building a weapon, and they have the Houthis. That's it. That's it. Let's take the nuclear program away from them. We can do it.
President Trump and his team came into the White House determined to reverse the course of American foreign policy. Most every president does. It's how President Obama thought about President Bush, how President Trump thought about President Obama, how President Biden thought about President Trump. And where President Biden was down, Trump would be up. Where Biden was left, Trump would be right. Where Biden was blue, Trump would be red. Every question of American foreign policy, with any relevance whatsoever to the cut and thrust of domestic American politics, would henceforth be set off in the opposite direction. In the Middle East, President Trump thought his predecessor was too acquiescent to Iran, too squeamish to empower the Israelis to protect themselves, too untroubled by Houthi attacks. For President Trump and many of his supporters, the symbol of the Biden administration was the pullout from Afghanistan in the fall of 2021, a sign and symbol of American weakness, incompetence, bewilderment, and delusion. So in comes Donald Trump for his second term as president, and he begins by restoring the maximum pressure campaign on Iran. He confronts, with fire, the Houthis. He restores the American supply of materiel to Israel. And yet, these policy directions do not tell the whole story of the Trump administration's conduct of American foreign policy during its first 100 days. The foreign policy record, the disorder, and the personnel, and some possible future steps of the administration seem confused. Welcome to the Tikvah podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Silver. To clarify our confusion and shed light on the murky picture of the Trump administration's approach to the Middle East, my guest this week is Michael Doran. He's a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, contributor to Mosaic, Tablet, The Wall Street Journal, The Free Press. He's a co-host of the terrific new podcast Israel Update with Gadi Taub. This week, Mike joins me to talk politics and discuss how he sees the Trump administration's record in these early but consequential days. If you enjoy this conversation, you can subscribe to the Tikvah podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. I hope you leave us a 5-star review to help us grow this community of ideas. I welcome your feedback on this or any of our other podcast episodes at podcast@tikvah.org. And of course, if you want to learn more about our work at Tikvah, you can visit our website, tikvah.org, and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This conversation was recorded live in front of an audience of members of the Tikvah Society. If you'd like to learn more about supporting our work and joining the Tikvah Society, please visit tikvah.org/society. Here now is my conversation with Mike Doran. Michael Doran, welcome back to the Tikvah podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Mike, you have encouraged us to try to understand the way that the American administration looks at the Middle East in terms of those administrations that tend to see Israel as an asset and those administrations that tend to see Israel as a liability to American interests. And I think one would have to say that looking at the Trump administration, President Trump and his team seem to think that that Israel is an asset and a liability. So help us understand how the administration approaches the Jewish state.
So every president, there are two schools of thought about Israel in the American national security establishment. The traditional one, the one that surrounded Harry Truman in 1948, was certain that Israel was a liability. The argument was that's during the Cold War. The argument was that if the United States gets too close to Israel, it's going to drive the Arabs into the arms of the Soviet Union. And gradually over time, that view eroded, but it never ever went away. And there are reasons for that that go way beyond national security into American culture. But it's always that way, and every president is straddling those two views, which, like I say, they correspond to different arguments about American strategy, but they also bleed into American domestic politics. So Trump, I think, in his domestic constituency, he recognizes that he is expected to be pro-Israel in a way that Obama didn't. Progressives don't like Israel, or let's say progressives find Israel very problematic, and so Obama was always going to put distance between himself and Israel. And with Trump, it's a little bit different. His constituency really likes Israel and expects him to support it, but he also he has a strong constituency that wants to see him pull the United States back from the Middle East. And they believe, just like the Obama progressives, they believe that it's Israel that's dragging us into conflict in the Middle East. I don't think I wrote this for Mosaic, but we did these conversations about presidents, and I convinced myself, and I think I was probably right, that Harry Truman faced the same thing that Trump did, because everybody wanted, after World War II, the country wanted to bring the boys home, and just completely move off of a war footing, and he had to ramp up for the Cold War, and it was a real dilemma for him to ramp up the Cold War with all this pressure at home. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons that he was recognized Israel, one of them, there were many, but one of them was that Israel, among that constituency that, let's call them the isolationists, that stream of thought that just wants to disentangle us from Europe and from all of the nasty ways of the world beyond our borders, that constituency does respond to the pull toward Israel. So if you want to have more international engagement, and you want to convince people on that in that current of opinion to be engaged internationally, then you use Israel as a way of doing that.
Why is that? What makes Israel so special in American culture?
How much time do you have? That goes. He knows the answer to this. This is why he's smiling. That goes all the way back to the Puritans. The Puritans were the Puritans believed not that they were in a situation similar to the Israelites. They believed they were the Israelites. That's why they named all these towns in America after places in the Holy Land. They believed that America was the Holy Land. The Holy Land remained the Holy Land, right, but America was also the Holy Land. And the Israelites existed in the past, but they also existed now as Puritans. And that lasts all the way down to today in one form or another.
That there's some kind of spectral...
A metaphysical twin. That Israel is the metaphysical twin of the United States.
Okay. Coming back to now the 20th century, that picture of President Truman and Cold War politics, obviously that's completely different after the end of the Cold War and the rise of the global war on terror. And one of the dynamics that I think you helped explain more deeply than anybody that I've yet seen is the after effect of the global war on terror for our contemporary Middle East politics discussion now. As I've spoken to lots of friends on the Trumpy right, on the non-Trumpy right, I think that the global war on terror and America's engagement with Iraq is the thing that they're reacting to.
Yeah.
It hangs over so much.
It does.
So explain it.
So I mean, 65% of the people who fought in Iraq think it was a mistake. And even a larger percentage of the population as a whole thinks it was a mistake. And a huge part of the Trump constituency believes that our national security elite is just a bunch of globalists, who are lining their pockets with a lot of commitments overseas that don't represent the interests of the people at home. And I think our national security establishment was very slow to wake up to that. They thought it was nonsense when Trump started saying it. The people who reacted, the national security establishment that reacted against Trump, all they heard were the unnuanced, uninformed, crude statements about foreign policy. And they didn't hear the underlying message, which was, your elite is corrupt, it doesn't care about you. And so that was the real message. And so what did the elite do? They went and they signed all these letters saying Donald Trump doesn't understand foreign policy. Like they actually thought that was going to have an effect on the election. Trump was just looking at that and laughing and saying, "Please give me more." You know.
So whereas, according to this interpretation, there is a American democratic populist mindset that looks at the chaos and elite college campuses and says the elite institutions are corrupt and lying, and they look
Which they are.
and
Are they not?
And they look at the public health institutions, and over the course of COVID, and they say the elites are corrupt and lying.
They are.
And your interpretation is that the global war on terror and America's entrance into Iraq is kind of the predecessor to this wave of elite institutions crumbling over their own weight.
Yes. Yeah. I think so. That's exactly it. And whether I agree with that interpretation of the Iraq War or not, that's how it's interpreted now in Trump world, for sure. And there's no way to engage with them if you don't start from that assumption.
Okay, but here's the
not that you have to agree with that assumption, but you have to understand that that's where they're coming from, and that a lot of people agree with them. A lot.
Here's the problem, and here's the dilemma that I think conservatives, these conservative ears, hearing that analysis. Well, that analysis, that whole way of thinking about America's engagement with Iraq, that is the very thing that propelled President Obama into national politics. That is the underlying foreign policy impulse of the Obama administration. So now you're telling me that that's the same foreign policy impulse that is underlining the Trump administration?
Yeah, exactly. There's an element in the Trump, the Tucker Carlson libertarian take on the Middle East is virtually identical to the progressive take. Because what does it say? It says, distance yourself from Israel, cut a deal with Iran. That's the deal is out there to be had, John. It's out there to be had. If we would only be nicer to Iran, then we could cut the deal and we could get out of the Middle East and we don't have to have troops on the ground.
And it's the Saudis and the Israelis that are preventing us.
The Saudis, and especially the Israelis, Israel's a big catapult that's throwing us into needless conflict with Iran. That's the view, and it's silly. It's a silly view, but it's a very prevalent one, and it is deeply embedded in our national security establishment.
One has to hold that is clearly one of the factors that is influencing the Trump administration's policy.
This is an important thing to remember. Sorry to interrupt. It's coming out of domestic politics, but it's always been in the national security establishment too. You read Bob Gates's memoir. It's very interesting, because Bob Gates, he's CIA director under George H.W. Bush, Secretary of Defense under Bush, Secretary of Defense under Obama, consummate Washington insider. If you read his memoir, he says that he rails against Bibi Netanyahu. Talks about Netanyahu in terms he doesn't talk about any other leader, not Khamenei, not Putin, none, and says he should be banned from these 16 acres from the White House. He should never be allowed into the White House. Because he feels, Gates, that, he doesn't say it like this, but this is what it is. Bob Gates, is the custodian of the national interest. He understands what the interests of the United States are and what its foreign policy should be. And here comes this leader of a little pipsqueak country of 9 million people that Bob Gates doesn't feel any particular attachment to, and he can talk over the heads of all of the national security establishment to the American people. And suddenly, Bob Gates, when he goes on Capitol Hill, he's got congressmen telling him, Netanyahu tells me X, Netanyahu tells me Z. Explain to me why you're doing that. It's infuriating to have this. The guy should be banned.
One has to acknowledge that this is a part of the Trump administration's strategic concept.
It is.
And at the same time, you also have to acknowledge that President Trump we're now having this conversation about 100 days, I don't know exactly what day today is, about 100 days into the administration. President Trump came into office in his second term and restated maximum pressure and has been very aggressive in kinetic confrontation against the Houthis, that there's another aspect to the Trump administration's strategic concept, which is not this at all, but it's opposite. So just to elaborate how those two things live together, it seems like there's a zig and a zag in the administration.
Yeah, well, Trump is very good at being on both sides of a lot of issues. You know, he does it in an idiosyncratic way because he'll say, you know, some people say, and they're saying, but I don't know if I agree. Maybe they're right, but maybe they're wrong. Maybe I'll blow them to smithereens. Maybe I'll make a deal with them, right? And so he gets to be the decider in the end. He's got Tulsi Gabbard telling him that Israel's a problem and we can cut a deal with Iran, and then he's got Pete Hegseth saying something else entirely. And so, in the end, Trump will decide. A lot of these discussions in previous administrations would have gone on behind closed doors, and it would have been deliberated behind closed doors, and it wouldn't be deliberated in front of the TV cameras in front of the American people. But this is domestic politics because he has these constituencies. He won the Arabs of Dearborn. He won the ultra Orthodox Jews of Pennsylvania and New York, and so he's got to keep them all. And he's got the Tucker Carlson to worry about as well.
Wait, but is your view that
he throws them all a bone? You know, you never know what he's going to do in the end.
Wait, but is your view that that the management of his domestic coalition is the primary driver of that?
No, but he's aware of that, and that's it. It's a factor in consideration, for sure.
So, but instead of
we'll never know where. The thing is, you'll never know with Trump how he got to the decisions that he did. But I think we can all see you could not have done what Trump did, the greatest comeback in American political history, if you don't have some idea of what you're doing. I don't know how strategic he is, and I always ask people who know him, is he strategic or just instinctive? And I get both answers. Oh, he's incredibly strategic. No, he's all instinct. No, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. But you can't be an idiot and do what he's done.
Well, it does seem to me that in his case, this kind of madman approach to foreign policy serves American interests as it relates to other leaders that he's negotiating with, because he doesn't allow them to easily predict where he's going to go, and it does allow him to have more leverage, it seems, than previous presidents, more traditional presidents.
At times, but what he did with the tariffs here, where he blinked and backtracked, I think that's very damaging if you don't follow through. If you're going to pull out a gun, you better be willing to use it. If you pull it out and then put it away, well, then people see that you can be played with. I think some of the moves with Putin and some of the moves with the Iranians were not wise. They're not. He's not. See what the Iranians are very good at, and Americans are not for some reason. And you know, I used to watch. There are moments where hard-nosed American businessmen really lose all of that ability. Like I saw when I was at Princeton, I saw guys, you know, that if I went and said, I want to start a leaf blowing company, you know, they'd study me and they'd make sure that they got 51 or 52% of the company, right? And they'd be on the phone with me every day, and in the end they'd take the company away from me once it got big enough, right? But you put the same guy and make him Secretary of State, and all of a sudden they start making concessions up front to bring people to the table and so on. And the Iranians have studied us so well, and they know that we will pay for them to be at the negotiating. We'll pay them to negotiate with us. And we do it all the time, over and over and over and over again. And I see him falling for some of that because he wants to show, I think it's two things. He wants to show his domestic constituents that he's working to go negotiate. But there's a cost to that. If you start negotiating, everyone in the world sees that you're doing that, and they start adjusting. And then if you go a certain distance down the road in the negotiation, there's a cost to pulling out. And so, and I don't know that he thought all that through. The second mistake, I think, is that he thinks we're stronger than we are.
That is especially true at this moment vis-a-vis Iran, when there is still this window where Israel's neutering of Iranian defense technology, Iranian defenses, there is a window of maneuverability right now. And the very fact of negotiation begins to close that window.
Yeah, this is the window's closing, and we're not as strong as we think we are today. Just before I sat down with you, I saw that we lost a fighter jet that fell off of the USS Harry Truman aircraft carrier in the Red Sea because it was maneuvering suddenly to avoid being hit by a Houthi missile. So we thought that we would snarl at the Houthis, show them our mean teeth, and they would stop firing ballistic missiles at us and at the Israelis, and they're not.
And now can claim a downed jet.
They can claim a downed jet, yeah, and rightfully so they can. How many adversaries of the United States have shot missiles at U.S. Aircraft carriers in the history of U.S. aircraft carriers? I'd like to know that. That's something we can ask ChatGPT after this.
Okay, you actually recently wrote another one of these very incisive essays, this one for the Free Press, specifically about the Trump administration's approach to negotiating with Iran. Tell us, in your estimation, how it seems similar to and how it seems different from the Obama administration's approach.
It looks too much like Obama for comfort. And that's why I wrote. I didn't want to. I would like to be. I voted for Trump, and I much prefer him to the progressives. But I would like to be very, very friendly and supportive of the administration early on like this. But they're moving really quickly in this Obama-esque direction. Like you said, Iran is weaker now than at any time in the past, and we can see that. Prior to October 7th, it was legitimate to fear that if there was an escalation against Iran, Hezbollah would open up with everything on Israeli cities. Iran would have the ballistic missiles that could also hit Israeli cities or hit Saudi Arabia or our own bases. And you could, having a nightmare scenario of what war with Iran was like was completely legitimate. The Israelis knocked them down 3 pegs, and we can see now they hit Israel with their absolute best shot, and it's not good enough. Hezbollah's been hollowed out. Hamas is gone as a fighting force. All the Iranian air defenses are destroyed. Why do we have to tolerate a force like the Houthis shooting at our aircraft carriers? Why do we have to tolerate all the terrorism from the Iranians? They're like a pufferfish. I mean, they're making themselves look bigger and more fearsome than they actually are. They don't have a regular military. They don't have a regular air force. They have this nuclear program that's on the verge of building a weapon, and they have the Houthis. That's it. That's it. Let's take the nuclear program away from them. We can do it. Their nuclear program now, 10 years after the JCPOA, is so much more advanced. This is the key point here, that if we have JCPOA-like restrictions on their nuclear program, they can flip a switch, and in a week, literally a week, they will have enough fissile material to build a bomb. So JCPOA-type restrictions, we want to talk about restrictions on the stockpile and on the levels of enrichment. Those will not give us the year-long, the whole idea of the JCPOA, the theory behind it, which was always
by its advocates.
It was by its advocates.
Yeah.
It was always a lie, but the theory was that this gives us we have 1 year of breakout time, and when we start seeing them moving in that direction, we have a year to decide what to do, not a week. Now we have a week.
I want to now switch our point of view from thinking about the Trump administration and Washington to now thinking about Jerusalem and Israel. Over the course of the U.S.-Israel relationship since October 7th, I think you could say that there were different phases. And President Biden was extremely supportive, made a presidential visit to Israel very early on. And then at a certain point, that changed decisively. And in response to that decisive change on the part of the American administration, I think one would have to say that the Netanyahu government changed as well. It was less deferential. It decided to do what it thought was in its own interests, even if it directly contravened advice and even more than advice from the Americans. entering into Rafah, doing this. I think that obviously it made sense for Prime Minister Netanyahu to try to be very close to President Trump and to cheer things that President Trump did that served Israel's interests. If the Americans proceed in negotiating something like a JCPOA with the Iranians, what advice would you have for the Israelis?
They're in a pickle. Let me describe the pickle first, because they can't attack on their own, the Iranians, because Iran will widen the front and attack Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So if they attack, they suck in the United States. They need the United States to keep the Iranians from widening the front. They need the United States actually to finish the job in Iran. They need the 30,000-pound bombs. They don't have the delivery mechanism to hit the hardened targets like Fordo. So they need the Americans for that. They need them on the offense. They need them to keep the Iranians from widening the front, deterring them from attacking others, closing down shipping and that sort of thing. And then they need them on the defense. They can't. Israel can't with its own systems. Can't defend against a massive Iranian ballistic missile attack. And the Israelis set back the production of ballistic missiles, but they didn't destroy the arsenal, so they can still shoot another salvo or salvos, mini salvos, like they did before. And the Israelis need the Americans for that. So that's the dependency. That means that when Trump says, "I want to go negotiate," Netanyahu can't say, I don't like that. I'm going to go my own direction. Plus, they need the U.S. on Gaza. The Gaza's not over. It's still going on. And the same levers that the Biden administration had over the Israelis, the Trump administration has too. It's much less inclined to use them. There was an unofficial arms embargo that the Biden administration implemented, and they have lifted that. But the Israelis are aware of the cost of going against Trump. So that's the pickle. What I would do if I were them, and it's easy to say because it's very risky. You saw that there was this massive fire at the Bandar Abbas refinery over the weekend. Hopefully that was the Israelis. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I would like to see lots of Iranian facilities having lots of problems. We know the Israelis can do that kind of thing. We saw it in Lebanon. We saw it before in Iran. And now it's very risky because the Iranians are going to complain to the Americans, and the Americans are going to complain to the Israelis, and it's going to become very tense. But the magic here is that Netanyahu needs to empower those people around Trump, like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz, to make the argument that this is going to happen one way or another. Whether we negotiate this deal or don't negotiate it, this conflict is going to happen. So we might as well be on the right side of it and look after the American interests. Because they all understand that Iran not having a nuclear weapon is in the American interest. So it's a very tricky thing to put enough pressure so that you empower people from saying that, to say that, rather than you put them in a position where they have to say Israel's the problem. The Israelis in 1955-56, the Israelis, and I don't know if they did this on purpose. I can't find anyone who knows and who will say, but the British were 100% against the Israelis, as against the Israelis as a power can be. And they had, at that time, the British were a real Middle Eastern power. They had forces in Jordan that could do very, very severe damage to Israel. And the Israelis were and they were responsible for the defense of Jordan, and the Israelis were hitting Jordanian targets. It's complex, but the Egyptians were organizing Jordanians to attack the Israelis, just like the Iranians are now organizing Palestinians to attack
Right.
the Israelis. And so the Israelis were hitting back into Jordan, and all the Jordanians, all the Palestinians in Jordan were saying, what, to the Jordanian government, why are you in bed with the British and they're not protecting us, they're protecting the Jews. So the British were very anti-Israel, but they switched at a certain moment. They realized that their problem was Nasser, just like of Egypt, just like Israel's problem was Nasser of Egypt. And the French then went to the British and said, look, the real problem is not the Israelis, the real problem is Egypt. So why don't you get in bed with us together with the Israelis and we'll go take care of the Egypt problem. And Anthony Eden, who hated the Israelis, said, yes, I'll do that, right? This is what you need now. You need people to say, look, we have to understand what the real problem is. The real problem is not the monkey business that the Israelis are doing with Iranian facilities and the Israelis are doing with the Iranian facilities. The real problem is the Iranians themselves. Let's go take care of business. That's what they should aim for. But to know exactly what to do, I have to know what the Israeli capabilities are, and I'd have to know where's the conversation exactly between Netanyahu and Trump. They sat together for 2 hours, one-on-one, and they talked about this issue. And Trump, I'm assuming, made certain commitments. What were those commitments? So Trump would have to be moving away from those commitments, and Israel would have to be carrying out policies that would pull him back to the commitment. I think that's the key.
I want to now widen our aperture and look at some of the other nations in the Middle East. Of course, Israel has bilateral relationship with Jordan, with Egypt, and Jordan seems to be undergoing some kind of fascinating evolution right now, banning the Muslim Brotherhood. I want to ask, what is the story behind it? How you interpret it? What does it mean? What does it mean for Israel?
Look, I think they feel the threat, and they see that there's a Muslim Brotherhood government in Syria right now, and they actually want to. The Jordanians would like to normalize with Syria, I think, if they can, but they're trying to set the table so that if there is normalization, it will have the least impact on domestically on Jordan.
In Egypt?
Egypt is, the whole issue there is that the Sisi government is nothing if not anti-Muslim Brotherhood, but they've been the hardest hit by the Houthi attacks on shipping through the Red Sea, because the dues through the Suez Canal is a major source of foreign income for them. So the revenues are way down as a result of the Houthi actions. They don't have the power themselves to go end it. They would like the Americans to end it, but the Americans haven't ended it yet. For them, the shortest route to ending the Houthi restrictions on shipping through the Suez Canal is to get a ceasefire in Gaza, a permanent ceasefire. They don't want any Gazans in Egypt. They can't. They're not in favor of Gaza Lago. They want to continue to have influence over the Gaza question. So there's a lot of tension with the Israelis.
Is there a compelling Egyptian alternative?
No. They want to manage it so that Egypt is the primary outside power. Why do we go to the Qataris? We go to the Qataris because we don't want the Egyptians to own the Hamas negotiations. We want to play them off against each other.
Can you imagine any kind of fundamental reassessment of the U.S.-Qatar relationship?
You tell me what it's like, and then tell me how we should reassess it.
Seems that what is it like as it pertains to our particular issues? There has been an alternative reality that I could tell you a story about that never came to pass. The alternative reality is that just as Jews went to protest outside the Soviet embassies to try to raise our voice and recover our hostages then, so too now. The American Jewish community and its friends would have gone to protest outside the Qatari embassies and harass Qatari officials and raise our voice because of the leverage that they have to help release our hostages now. And that did not materialize, and so one has to ask.
Yeah, I don't see the world that way. I don't think the Qataris have the levers to get the hostages released. And if they started playing real hardball with Hamas would just take its game somewhere else. It's not, and I think the Qataris do basically what we want them to do, with some, basically. I don't think there's anything that the Qataris do that we're really angry about that they wouldn't stop if we would tell them that. I think every minute, I'm not on the, I know that I make the pro-Israel community upset with these kind of things. Every minute spent talking about Qatar is a wasted minute. The issue is Iran. The issue is the United States alignment with Iran. Qatar, if our policy is X on Iran, the Emiratis are X minus 1. There's a ton of Iranian money in the Emirates right now. Every time the Emirates sends a beautiful Emirati woman to Israel who speaks perfect Hebrew and tells the Jews, I love you, they send another official to Iran that tells the Iranians that they love them. But the Israelis only see the beautiful woman speaking Hebrew. They don't see the guy going to Tehran. So we're X, the Emiratis are X minus 1, or maybe even X minus 2. But the Qataris are X minus 2. The Qataris got independence from the Emirates when the British left because of Iran. That's the Shah of Iran. They're always closer to Iran than the other. They tend to be closer to Iran than the other Gulfies. And when we go and are sweet to the Iranians, they go further toward the Iranians. If we don't want them to be sweet to the Iranians, we should be tough on the Iranians, and then they'll move.
So the U.S.-Qatar relationship is a function of America's relationship to Iran. Confrontation with Iran.
Yes. Yeah. That's a slight overstatement, but I think ultimately that gets at the heart of it. There are 300,000 Qataris. It's not a country.
Okay, but its presence in American culture and American media is not small.
This is a category mistake, because the Qataris are doing some things that you don't like. You look at all of the fact that they built the medical center of Cornell or whatever, and you think they're using all of that influence. They don't even know who's. There's no lever they're pulling at Cornell you're connecting up dots, in my opinion, that are not connected.
Okay, so now let's say
they are afraid. They're a tiny little country that could be swallowed up very easily. They put money down on every number. This is what they all do. Everyone in the Middle East does this, but the Qataris do it especially. They have put money on every color, money on every number, so that when things get rough, they have somebody to call.
Okay, we're having this conversation on Monday evening. Let's say on Tuesday, Michael Doran is appointed to be the National Security Advisor in the White House. What's your advice?
I'd say no.
What's this?
I don't have the seriously. The National Security Advisor has to sit in meetings from 7:30 in the morning till 9 at night, sitting. It's nothing glorious about it.
Okay, you're the National Security Advisor for 1 hour.
Yeah.
Okay, and your task is to make a strong recommendation to the president about what America should do over the course of this administration, between now and the midterms and between
Two things.
What our approach should be to Iran. What is your recommendation?
There are two priorities, and everything else pales in. That's why I say this. All this Qatari talk. Stop it. It doesn't. Maybe some of it's true, even, right? But it's a tertiary issue. Number one, smash the Iranian nuclear program. Take it away from them. It has to be wrested from the claws of this beast. They are not going to give it up through negotiation. They're not. So we have to take it from them, right? That's number one. Number two, create a buffer between Turkey and Israel in Syria. Keep the Turks and the Israelis from bumping up against each other. You do those two things, then we can turn the Middle East into a totally new place.
This conversation was recorded on April 28th.
Michael Doran, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.